Welcome back. We are back from Power Tour. I did not film several of the things that happened with this car on that trip, so I want to go over everything that broke and everything that we had to fix in the field, and then I want to talk about all the stuff that's going to come for upgrades and repairs due to the trip on this car. The first and most pressing problem with this car is these damn motor mounts. Now I made them myself, and I know you can't see them down there, but I made the motor mounts myself. I made them out of a poly bushing kit for a leaf spring, and technically they work. They do hold the engine in the car, unless the engine crossmember decides to try to fall out. Anyway, they do work. They're very universal. You can weld to the sleeve on the outside, but as a result of those super stiff motor mounts, this car shakes so bad. I tried to catch some of this footage when we were on the way back, but the camera was in the wrong mode. Here is kind of what it sounds and feels like in this car with those super stiff motor mounts. Damn cam sync. Like crazy. Literally, this thing was shaking itself apart. The excessive vibration from the motor mounts caused all kinds of problems on the trip. You guys saw in the first video, the bolts for the downpipe on the turbo actually backed themselves all the way out except for two. One of them's broken off in the turbo. We lost the third or second one, and then two were holding it on. The downpipe was like a ½ an inch off the back of the turbo. We had a massive exhaust leak, being that the sensor is right there. I'll show you. For those that watched the first video, you probably saw this, but right here is the downpipe. Here's the bolt that's broken off. The other three are still in for now, but here's the sensor. So if you imagine the downpipe being ½ an inch off the back of the turbo, this is a massive exhaust leak. That sensor was reading the same thing all the time, no matter if I added fuel or took it away. So it was running like crap. That's one of the things that vibrated loose. A couple of other times on the trip, the bolts that hold the turbo to the manifold also backed out. And you can see that there's lock washers on there. We even Loctited those. We did everything we freaking could to try to get those to stay on. Luckily, the manifold to the head, those bolts stayed tight. We also developed a slight leak in the clutch. We were losing fluid out of the clutch master at every single stop. I'm not sure why. I wonder if the throwout bearing eating itself to death may have had something to do with that. Day 2 of Power Tour had a couple of other weird things that happened. I mentioned in the video that we lost a fuse that powers the cam sensor. Without the cam sensor, the car doesn't run. We lost that fuse 2 times and we were stranded on the side of the road for a few minutes, replaced the fuse, but here's actually what we did that got this car to run the rest of the trip. I used what I had when I wired this car, and I put this little 4-slot fuse block right here, and I needed an extra fuse, so I used an add-a-fuse up here. And the thought was maybe this add-a-fuse, because the car shakes so bad, was shaking itself loose and maybe, you know, arcing or something and causing that little 3-amp fuse to blow. So what we did is we ran tape around the entire fuse block to hold that add-a-fuse down as tight as we possibly could. And we also put a 5-amp fuse in there and did not have a problem the rest of the trip. The second thing we did, if you guys can see down in here, this right here, this is actually the lid to a case for a roll of electrical tape. And we wedged that in between the fan motor and the plug down here. This plug over here for the distributor or the cam sensor. We thought maybe because this is so tight in there, you know, if the engine was rocking around or something like that, maybe that wire or something was touching the fan motor and maybe grounding out or whatever. We're not sure, but between this fix right here and that fix over there, we had no more fuse related issues and this thing ran the entire rest of the trip. This car has a Volkswagen radiator and it has an inline filler on it and a little overflow hose. I didn't have the overflow hose hooked to anything, but apparently you do need that. So I added my own overflow jug. It's cheesy, but it worked. So here's a better picture of that setup, or a better view. This is the inline fill right here. This actually came from I think like a Dodge Stratus, or I've also heard you can use one from a Dodge Dakota. It just goes in line with the upper hose. So this is the overflow hose right here that we added, and then here is my overflow jug, which is some sort of random utility jug from Blaine's Farm and Fleet. We shoved it down here, shoved the hose in it, put some duct tape on it. Believe it or not, that worked flawlessly for the rest of the trip. You guys also saw that the rear springs with all our tools and the 2 guys in there, this thing was riding really low, and we were worried about the tire. We put the air shocks on the first day of Power Tour. That's where we ran into Kevin. That was the fix. I mean, we just added air to them every day because they lose a little bit overnight. But we were able to carry all of our tools, 2 guys, and we did not rub tire anymore. But I'll show you something cool. So if you're on a trip like that and you have, you know, sweet wheels on a car that maybe don't fit, or, you know, fit kind of like these do, this was just a paint marker. So we took a paint marker and made a mark here on the side of each tire in the back, and you can see this one has a stripe through it. So at some point we did hit hard enough and the suspension compressed enough to where this tire actually touched somewhere up here inside the fender lip. Under normal driving circumstances, this would never be a problem, but because we had all of our tools and 2 big guys in this little car, that's what we had to do. So every stop, we would check the gap back here, and then we would check this paint mark to see if there was anything worn off. All right, from inside the car, you guys will remember our blinkers were not working. And right now, you guys can probably see down here, yeah, this is our jumper wire that goes right from the power coming into the car right here, and it jumpered back down to the brake switch. And you can see that was a very temporary connection just to give us brake lights for the drive home. Also over here, you guys can't probably see it right here. So this is the 12-volt outlet that Andrew added. Here's the factory one over here. I actually put a new socket in there, but for whatever reason, the power coming into this outlet, it kept popping a fuse, and then it would take our radio out. So Andrew added this one completely separately with these wires right here directly to the battery on a switch. I don't know if I'll keep that, but it did work for this trip. After dinking around under here and looking, what I actually found, and I think this might have been the problem, was the wire, one of the wires going to the brake switch, which I believe was the incoming power from the car. One of those wires to the brake switch was literally broken. It had like a strand or 2 of wire holding it on to that brake switch right there. So that was giving us high resistance and acting like we had no power to the brake switch, even though we didn't have a fuse that was open or anything like that. So I think what I'm gonna try is to just repair the wiring, because the brake switch still works. So I'm gonna try repairing the wiring and seeing if that will allow us to get signals back, because the way that this is wired, you kind of need the brake switch to be functioning. And yeah, so I'm going to try that first, and if that doesn't work, then I'm going to take the column apart and see if I can either repair this brake or this blinker switch, and if I can't do that, I'll use the one that Austin from Lucor bought us. Lastly, and probably the biggest letdown downfall of the whole thing, or the whole trip, the clutch in the Datsun is junk. Now, it's a used clutch. It came with the engine and transmission that I bought. I got that from Ryan out in Ohio. He had never run it. He knew nothing about it. And anybody that looked at it probably would have said, throw it in the trash, use something else. So anytime, I don't know, we were in like 4th or 5th gear, if we wanted to boost on it at all, if you gave this thing any more than like 20 to 30% throttle and it started to actually make boost, it would drive right through the clutch. So 4th and 5th gear were fine for cruising around, driving normally, but they did not work when you were trying to make any kind of power. So the clutch disc itself is junk. I have a plan for that, and I'll cover that in a video. I think that'll be upcoming. The last thing that went wrong was the throwout bearing. I'm gonna see if you guys can hear this on camera. If not, then you'll have to wait until I pull the transmission to show you. So I'm not sure how well you guys could hear that. The howling, whining, whatever that noise is, that's the bearing. The throwout bearing is essentially out of grease. So right as you were trying to engage or disengage the clutch, right at that point where it would take up and touch the pressure plate, that bearing is roached. I'm betting that when I pull the transmission out, we're going to see those clutch fingers or the diaphragm spring fingers are damaged, and the throwout bearing itself is probably worn down to almost nothing. Regardless, the transmission has to come out of this car. I want to make a couple of modifications to the tunnel anyway, but it does have to come out. We'll put a clutch in there. Okay, so that's the list. I think first off, I'm going to troubleshoot the lighting, because I can do that for next to no money while I wait for, make a decision on clutch parts and other stuff. Number two is going to be those motor mounts. My goodness, they shake like crazy. I can't stand it anymore. I think I found a rubber leaf spring bushing that I can swap in for the polyurethane ones that are in there. And third will be the clutch. Got to pull the trans, got to do the throwout bearing. I'm going to throw a flywheel, a pressure plate, and a clutch disc at it while I'm in there. It's got a brand new slave, so I don't have to worry about that, but it does have to come out. Hello again, viewers. Out here trying to troubleshoot the lighting on the Datsun here, and some funky stuff is going on. When we hit the blinker go left, we get the hazards. When we hit the blinker to go right, we get the blinker. I've just temporarily reattached power to the brake switch. I believe that is working. However, I was looking at a bunch of wires and everything seems to be connected properly from the inside of the car to the marker lights and stuff. My gut feeling is we have a wear issue on some wiring and stuff. So I took the blinker switch apart. I think I found something. All right, so for those of you that haven't ever seen this before, it's kind of what a steering column in a 510 looks like with the upper and lower plastics missing. So this here is the blinker switch, turn signal switch, and man, oh man, she is crusty. Very much so, very crusty in here. But here's the interesting thing. If you look really close, put my light down here. If you look really close, right here, that is a wire that looks like it was broken off of a terminal. There's also a wire here that is loose. There are other wires taped up around the ignition switch right here. I'm not sure what those are for. So I disconnected the wiring from the rest of the harness here, and I'm going to investigate this a little bit more. So I think it's just a couple of screws and this whole thing will slide right off the column, and then we can take a closer look at it. This is an important wire, I believe, right here. So that I have to figure out where it attaches and then reattach it. But then also, and this might be very tough to see, this black and green wire right here, the insulation is actually frayed on it, and it was touching this little strain support or strain relief bracket right here, which is where the harness kind of clips in. You fold that over so that it doesn't pull so hard on the solder joints. If I can figure out where to reattach this and maybe wrap up that wire with a little better insulation, I'll plug this back in and we'll see if our blinkers are fixed. All right, after a lot more digging, I think maybe the issue is the hazard switch. I took the hazard switch apart, and what I found was one of the little copper spring contact pieces had actually fallen off. It looks like the plastic there just got a little loose. It's not holding it on anymore. So inside this switch, there's two sets of contacts here. These actually feed into the switch first, and then this guy right here goes in between the contacts in there and either connects or disconnects certain circuits. So with one of those being loose to the point where it fell off, I think that could be the result of why we had some really funky stuff happening with our lights. So I'm going to try slip all this back together, see if I can't get this switch back together and plug it in and try it out. Okay, so it was a little bit of a fight, but looks like this switch is back assembled properly and the contacts are moving. So I'm going to put the little bottom plate in and plug it in, and we'll see what happens. Okay, there you go. I don't know, give it a try. Okay, so that's left front, left rear. Right rear and right front. All right, man, wow. I'm happy that I got these darn lights working. So it ends up, the problem the entire time was the hazard switch. Apparently the blinkers and brake lights and everything, a whole bunch of circuits actually pass through that hazard switch. And I'm guessing because this car vibrates so much that some of the contacts came loose in that switch. So the last thing I have to get is brake lights and just double check that running lights work. And then I think we are all set to go. All right, now that the electrical is finally working on this car, I think it's time to make it trade places with the Oldsmobile. I gotta finish fixing the rear end in the Oldsmobile. I plan on taking that to Iola in a couple weeks, but then we can get this car up in the air and hopefully get a clutch order for it. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop right there on the Datsun this week. I have clutch parts coming, and I think the goal now is to try to get the clutch in this car and installed before we head to the Iola Car Show, which is a huge car show and swap meet here in Wisconsin. So Aaron and Emily Reeves are going to be there, and I want to show them this car. That's one of my goals. And we might also have a special guest coming with us on that trip. That's yet to be determined, so stick around. If you guys see, we do have build season merch. We just got hats in here. We got 3 colors of that. We got like 40 colors of this t-shirt. I'm looking at adding some more stuff to the merch store. That link is in the description below. If this is the first video you've watched on this car, there's like 35 others, including our 2 videos on Power Tour. So check out some of those other videos. If you guys like the car in the background over there, there's a video coming out about that very, very soon. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. If you're considering subscribing, give it a try. It's free to you and it helps the channel grow. Thanks a lot. Catch you in the next one.